And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Today, we're hosted by Nextime in association with the U.S. India Business Council and ICICI Bank in Canada. My name is Mark Lessem, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a senior executive director with Nextime, and I lead the efforts to enhance the presence of our company in North America. Like many of you, I'm a business executive with operating experience across multiple functions and different industries. I'm going to share our contact information at the end of this session, and I'd welcome meeting with anybody interested in learning more about how Nextime might support you. We're pleased to present the second of our four-part webinar series titled Global Capability Centers, India as the Preferred Destination. I invite you to join us for the remaining installments, and I'll share those dates for those sessions shortly. In our first installment, we covered the emergence of GCCs and the key reasons behind India as a top GCC destination. Today's topic is on GCC operating models and how to build cyber resilience. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our distinguished panel. Eric Schweitzer, CFO at Seneca Holdings, Suhal Akhtar, head of IG India, and Nimish Shah, Vice President of Nextime. Now, the agenda for the next 60 minutes is as follows. I'm going to begin with a brief presentation to be followed by our expert panel discussion, and we will conclude with audience questions. So please note that you are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please share them with us through the question box on the control panel. We'll address these in writing if time doesn't permit us to cover them during our broadcast today. So our first installment in this series was broadcast about 1 month ago, and I'm going to take just a moment to reflect on a few key points in order to set the context for today's session. Number one, we learned that 80% of GCCs navigated the COVID pandemic without significant operational interruption, and that during that same time frame, 60% of those centers reported greater than 10% growth. We also learned that India was the preferred location for GCCs even during the pandemic, and that the Indian GCC market is now estimated to be worth over $60 billion in revenue by 2025. Further, we also spoke about the incentives that India has to offer for GCC establishment. Among those advantages, our panel of experts at the time emphasized cost, talent, and the infrastructure benefits that India provides. Finally, we did spend time focusing on the digital efforts behind India-based GCCs. So that's a little bit of background. Now we're going to delve into the journey of a GCC setup. Global capability centers evolved from cost generators to strategic business enablers and value generators. A GCC goes through various stages in its life cycle. So during the initial stage, the majority of transactional activities, headcount, and budgets are offshored under local governance with the aim of cost reduction. As GCCs grow over time, there's an increase in demand for service and for talent. Companies then shift from focusing exclusively on cost reduction toward increasing service standards and improving efficiencies. Finally, GCCs transform into global integrated business service centers, and in this form, they take onus of all cross-functional transactional activities. But their objectives go beyond improving operational efficiencies to now include an added responsibility of creating value and innovating new solutions. So now let's talk about the different GCC operating models. First, there are captive models, which are offshore units that act as an extended arm to their global businesses. The captive serves as a direct subsidiary, operates under and keeps a similar environment as the parent entity. Another operating model is BOT, or Build, Operate, and Transfer. Global businesses often work with a vendor partner to set up a GCC. Initially, the partner will manage operations, and then transfer of ownership occurs once the capability center reaches optimum efficiency. After this transfer, the partner's ecosystem is moved to the client's ecosystem. And it's important to note that the GCC may sometimes find new and innovative ways to improve the process between setup and transfer. The final operating model we'll chat about here today is managed services, where global businesses engage business process management service providers who offer a continuous flow of resources and support. This leads to a reduction in operating costs and incremental improvement in service delivery. Also, the service provider's ecosystem is structured in a way that it complements the client's ecosystem. This model requires minimal intervention and/or effort from the client. An organization's preferred GCC model depends on its goals and requirements. If the organization prefers an expedited go-to-market strategy, then captive and BOT models are optimal. But if the organization chooses economies of scale, then managed services will be the preferred route of choice. Now, while investment's a crucial factor, the savings from GCCs typically last several years. So it's essential that a clearly defined long-term strategy be in place before any new investments are made. Now that we've looked at the operating models, let's address cybersecurity, one of the most crucial aspects of success. In today's technology-driven environment, it's essential to implement protection measures in order to be cyber resilient. Creating a cybersecurity strategy in line with your business strategy may seem obvious, but missing this critical component can have negative implications down the line. Aligning strategies will help manage both regulatory and compliance risks. It's important to also understand the threats that your organization can be exposed to. There are many ways one can do this, including attack simulations, penetration testing, and a few more technical tests that can be performed. Now, data is everywhere, and personal data is becoming more valuable. Today, businesses need to be cognizant of region-specific privacy regulations that countries across the globe are implementing. Compliance with these laws is non-negotiable. Building security into operations that involve access points is also essential. Standard operating procedures need to be created and implemented for handling servers, networks, applications, and the people operating them, both on-premise and on the cloud. And your unique codes and/or applications are precious, and they must be secured. Insecure code invites vulnerability to the unknown. Secure code practices in one's development plan goes a long way to build a platform for being cyber resilient. And finally, if cybersecurity is compromised, it can affect operations that lead to disturbances in day-to-day functioning. This obviously has a major impact on business continuity, so a well-defined business continuity management plan is a must. So enough of the background, let's get right into the panel discussion, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's expert panel. Eric Schweitzer has over 20 years of experience in middle market corporate leadership, operations management, financial reporting, business intelligence, corporate restructuring, M&A, and C-level management. He is currently Chief Financial Officer of Seneca Holdings, a private equity-owned conglomerate of 18 manufacturing businesses. He was previously CFO of a vertically integrated home exterior products business, where he and the leadership team used GCCs to help navigate a turnaround from losing $10 million a year to earning over 20. Suhal Akhtar is global financial service leaders with over 25 years of diverse experience in envisioning, developing, and growing GCCs. He has extensive experience in application development in the financial and trading domain. Suhal heads the Bangalore Global Service Center of IG, a financial trading company headquartered in London. He's responsible for the strategic growth and development of the center while driving engagement and building an inclusive culture. Nimish Shah heads North America Sales and Marketing for Nextime. He's responsible for building strategic relationships with clients and helps align their Nextime service and solution capabilities to the client's needs. Nimish has over 28 years of experience in operations, business development, and technology. He's engaged with many multinational clients, including Fortune 500 companies, and he has successfully headed the transition and migration of their processes to Nextime's delivery centers. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and let's kick off the panel discussion with my first question, which in deference to all of you, I'll address to Suhal. And Suhal, as a leader at IG in the financial services sector, I know that you've deployed GCCs within your global framework. So what are some of the important decision points to be considered when deciding upon a GCC operating model?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Glad to be here and sharing this platform with Eric, Nimish, and of course, Mark here. So thank you for having me here. So about the question, before that, let me just give you a bit of a context about where I work. As Mark mentioned, I work for a company called as IG Group, and I run the Global Service Center for IG Group in India, in Bangalore. So at this point, within the service center, we have various different teams and operations in the areas of IT development, IT operations, and then business operations in the area of client onboarding, KYC, uh, corporate actions processing, since we are in the financial trading domain, and compliance. So coming to your question, Mark, when I think about any kind of new capability that we want to um, onshore, or we want to get offshore, get into the service center, for me, the first step would be to understand why, before we start thinking about how to do that. So why are we looking to do this, to move this process or operation into the GCC? Um, so I think that is very crucial to understand what are you trying to achieve and what is your end goal here. I'll give one example that we did sometimes a few years back, which was our client onboarding, KYC, AML operations. Um, so we had these operations in all the different offices across the globe, so about 17 different offices in different locations. So another challenge that we had was that people in different locations were doing the same work differently. There were variations. There were some local adjustments which were made. They were not up to the scale. Not all areas would have those economies of scale, so you won't have the kind of investment that you can do into automation or any kind of technology solutions for them. So the idea for us was, how can we consolidate these operations in the GCC with the aim of standardization, with the aim of improving the efficiency, with the aim of sharing best practices across other GCCs as well. So we have another center that we run in Poland. So that was a clear understanding that we had. So I think it was very important for us to understand why we are trying to achieve, or what we are trying to achieve, and why we are doing a certain operation. So when we did that, I think very soon we saw the benefits of that. But before you get to the benefits, you will have a period where the transition takes place, right? So it is very important to have the right team, right kind of people with transition background, with transition experience, who can help you with that. And um, for me, having expertise, getting someone into the GCC on secondment who is a subject matter expert and who can help the teams in the GCC set it up is also key. So that was one of the core learning that we got, that having that subject matter expertise, sitting close to the people is very important. And then having that two-way communication, having those face-to-face interaction between different offices, building those strong relationships, again, is very important. I know any kind of transition or anything that you're doing, measuring it is very important. So having your right KPIs measured, your system to collect data and measure that, and baselining your process when you start, again, is key, so that you can see how you improve, how you develop it over that period. So for me, that was one of the things that we did quite successfully, and very soon we saw that we were sharing those best practices with other locations, and we were able to also get efficiencies into our processes, into our systems. The other thing that I would like to mention is GCC is not like an outsourcing engagement. So having the right kind of culture which mirrors your corporate culture, your culture on the on-site location is also very important. So having that understanding cannot be possible without having those relationships built. So again, building those relationships, getting that culture embedded within the GCC, which mirrors your headquarters, your corporate culture. That is also very important, and that goes a long way towards your success.
Thank you, Sohal. It sounds like these decision points might go along strategic areas like consolidation and standardization, was certainly was something you were doing, but also some tactical things. So you've got to consider both the strategic and the tactics. The tactics being, maybe your subject matter experts, KPI culture and whatnot. It's a great kickoff to this discussion. And having done a number of these webinars, I just want to also recognize that sometimes I have to remind people, and I'll do it myself because I'll put myself on mute and have to remind myself to take off. But let's make sure we're all ready to speak. And I'm going to turn over to Eric. Eric, you've obviously led an organization, and with the recent turnaround that you did, you've had a lot of financial transformation journey. You must have witnessed internal disruptions in processes and operations. So with that in mind, and that as a backdrop, I want to ask you if you believe there comes a time to change the existing operating models within an organization, and which GCC model that maybe we talked about, or maybe you have another one that you feel work best for specific functions like the ones that you managed.
I appreciate that, Mark. Also great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all on the panel and speak to everyone that registered for the webinar. And I'll say the lead in, I forgot I was a panelist and I was just enjoying your presentation, Mark. So I appreciate the lead in. And I think as you were setting it up, honestly, it kind of answered this question that you just asked for me. You mentioned kind of as far as the journey of down the GCC path, kind of 3 steps or 3 stages. The first being a business looking for cost reduction opportunities. The second, increasing service standards or improving process. And the third, true value creation and generation. I was probably shaking my head up and down because I never had. This is the first time I've seen a part of this presentation, so I enjoyed that. And it was perfectly what happened for me. So my background, again, in 20 seconds, I started my career as a CPA. I worked for American Express, a very large company, a few years in public accounting, a bulk of my career as a corporate restructuring consultant for 14 years. And then I got my first real job about 6 years ago as a CFO of a private equity owned business. And I'm on my second journey of a CFO of a private equity held business. So started leveraging GCCs probably 6 or 7 years ago with my first CFO role around 2015. And the solution's got to fit the problem. So, like you said, cost reduction a lot of times is what the problem is you're trying to solve. For me, and maybe a hyphen next time you do that's presentation, Mark. I think stability is another possibility for an initial need. And for us, the first thing we had to solve was just stability within the organization. And the first thing we outsourced, like a lot of people do, is accounts payable. And we just could not find stability in that part of the organization. It was difficult to find people that I think enjoyed the payables enough to keep them on board. So there was tremendous turnover, and it was a problem. I felt like not the CFO of a middle market business. I felt like a recruiter for an accounts payable department.
Right.
So that was my pain point. So as far as what the need was. It was stability initially, and then we grew into it. We grew into a variety of other needs within the department, and expanded the role of the GCC significantly over a number of years. But we started simply with what the most acute need was, and grew it from there. And I'll say this is my second journey with the GCC and with my partners, which are next time I'll freely share. and growing into that value creation step, the third step. And we're specifically doing that through FP&A resources. So getting out from under just the pure transactional processing, which another key point I'll add is the emotional journey is a big piece of it too. And making sure you're holding folks' hands enough and doing all of this in a non-threatening way, because it can be scary for folks. I call it the boring stuff. You outsource the boring stuff. Who loves to reconcile accounts all day long? You don't usually see people raising their hands. Well, you're a special guy, Mark, but most people don't enjoy it so much.
Right.
But I'll stop there. Could talk about that topic all day long, but I know we only have.
No, I think it's interesting, and I appreciate it. The stability comment is critical because I think it's going to lead into Nimish, and I have a question for him here in just a minute, but it goes to where you start somewhere where it might be rote process and there was a pain point in your case, but ultimately through building up some of this trust and credibility, maybe it creates additional opportunity for this value creation beyond your initial pain point. And Nimish, I'm going to turn to you with that said, because I do think it's kind of an interesting segue. You've assisted companies of all sizes. I mean, there's no doubt in transitioning to the GCC model. In over 30 years of experience in this, can you comment on some of the best practices and pitfalls? Because I think the audience needs to hear that too, of executing a GCC model and maybe how partners like Nextime or others can help these organizations in their GCC journey. And this could be a little bit of deep background, but I think we should all hear this. And you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mark. I mean, one can write a book on this because, over the years, the whole outsourcing space and the GCC space has evolved and matured quite a bit. But if you ask me, I would say that setting up an offshore facility or a GCC is a strategic decision. So it requires a lot of active management and strong collaboration between partners. And it's not like I think Sohail mentioned that it's not like shifting your headache from yourself to the service provider and then expecting miracles to happen. And I think Eric would agree that there is considerable time, mind space, and effort that is required, at least in the initial phases, where a lot of planning goes into the whole decision-making process. And it's very important to have experts on your team to help you even come to a stage where what the various decisions that you need to make. And there are a lot of decisions that are needed before even you can start thinking of outsourcing. That things like what are the processes that you want to outsource, or what part will get outsourced, what will be in the part of the retained organization, what is the cost benefit analysis over a period of time, deciding your core objectives of outsourcing, whether it is efficiencies, whether it is cost, whether it is as Eric mentioned, stability, process transformation, or a combination of all these things. Also identifying the stakeholders who are going to get involved in this journey and getting a buy-in from them is also very critical. And lastly, the decisions about technology. In today's world, it's very, very important. What accesses are to be given? How is the data confidentiality going to be maintained? What about data privacy? So it's important to first get these decisions out of the way, be very clear about where you want to go. And once these decisions are taken, it's very critical to draw out a roadmap of shifting the processes. I have seen many clients do not have proper documentation or even process maps. And service providers can help you doing this. But this is a very critical step, because if it is properly planned out, it will actually reduce the chaos, any finger pointing that can happen between the outsourced organization and the retained organization. Another area of caution, I would say, is during the transition phase. A lot of noise does get created during this phase, and one needs to be prepared for this. And best way of handling this is to have a good communication channel with all the stakeholders. Best is to appoint a single person for decision making and be ready to take last minute decisions. Even with, I would say, best of the planning, there will be surprises and someone needs to be on top of the project. Coming to the senior management, I mean, all of us would agree that senior management often wants pretty quick results. I mean, everything had to happen yesterday, but a lot of patience is required in this journey. It is important first to settle down the outsource processes before even you power kick the various initiatives you want from outsourcing. Again, going back, drawing a roadmap and working with the service provider will help a lot in this. And lastly, I would say a governance cadence is very important. I cannot stress the importance of this. Even when things are going great, it is crucial to evaluate the service provider's performance or the GCC's performance, clearing any nagging issues in the process, basically preventing any issue buildup that can occur in future, and laying down the expectations for the next improvement areas. This is all a very dynamic process, and having a regular scheduled meetings with objectives in mind, where we are going, where do we want to go, is very, very critical. So in conclusion, I would say that people should follow the typical flow that is there: decision-making, planning, walkthrough of the processes, transitioning of the processes, being in a hypercare situation, getting into a steady state, stabilized situation, and then having a governance model around that.
You know, I appreciate hearing that, but as you're listing these things, it sounds very much to me like a classic case where good project management might be required.
Correct.
All right, which is good, but I mean, now you've got a provider and a client, and I wonder if you can maybe expand a bit. There's a high level of trust, obviously, that must happen, and maybe Eric can comment on this later, but Nimish, how do partners build that trust?
I would say, Mark, that I think the most important thing is transparency between the two parties. I think that's extremely important to develop that trust that is there. Again, we are talking about a journey here. We are not talking about, flipping a switch and things starting to work. I mean, you are going to go through this journey, and things are going to, you are going to get into stages where you stumble a little bit and things like that. So, let us say that there are issues in terms of delivery of expectations from the service provider. So instead of getting into a nasty argument, it is best to work with the service provider to see where the problem lies and work with them, and in fact, help them to recover. This is less expensive and more fruitful in the long run. We have witnessed this firsthand. As a service provider, we have had our share of stumbling blocks. But our trusted relationship with our clients and our ability to own our own failures incentivize the client to work with us and support us and help us recover. And the results are, I have seen at least the results have been, the gain is to the process, much more robust process, much better deliverables. So I would say a trusted relationship is based on transparency between the parties. All
right. Well, I imagine it becomes almost an extension of the client's team, and the team, as Eric mentioned earlier, might be difficult to sometimes maintain given the work, but we're very fortunate, I think, today in that Suhal manages a captive and Eric is a client of GCC. So we've got two different perspectives. I want to ask the same question then of both of you, and ask, maybe you'll be able to come at it from those perspectives. And we'll start with Eric and see if we can't get there. Eric, your experience with outsourcing as a client, then what's worked well and what have been some of the unanticipated challenges that you've come against? And then maybe how you've solved those issues, and just a general comment about the process, which I think you did touch on earlier, but maybe we can get a little more granular in terms of what worked well and what were some of the challenges and how you overcame them. And then, Suhal, I'm going to ask the same question of you after Eric's finished.
Absolutely, Mark. And piggybacking right where Nimish left off, and the question you asked to Nimish, or the follow-up, how do you build that trust? So I think that's, trust is always a key in business, and there's no magic bullet that gets you there. So, in appreciating the two perspectives, I think from my perspective, initially, I did not have experience with GCCs from the first 20 years of my career, and then saw the need, was aware of the solution, and reached out to some colleagues. They provided 5 providers. Next time happened to be one of those. Selected what I hoped and felt was the best one, and turns out I was right. So now on to round 2 at my second company here with Next Time. But starting out and thinking back, 6, 7 years ago when I first started down the journey myself, I also created a world that was small enough and I was comfortable enough handing over, and that even if it completely, we fell on our faces on both sides, it wouldn't be wildly disruptive to the business. My last business was a 60-site business, about a $300 million company. So we carved off about 5 sites, and we said, okay, we want to warm up getting payables taken care of with an outsourced solution. We carved off, I believe it was 5 sites, and said, okay, let's get these there. And Next Time, to your guys' credit, you didn't push for 20 or 60, or you didn't push for more, a bigger piece of the pie. You said that, that's a great solution and a great start. So you never pushed us past our comfort zone, which I think, right out of the gate, you started to build that trust. You didn't, and we could have started faster. We would have gotten up the curve in that first, 6 to 12 months, I think, faster had I been through the process before. Second time around, it was open floodgates, let's go. In my last transition, which was about a year and a half ago, which I'll also note was during the pandemic and fully remote, and we were still successful. So, that's 3 words came to mind when I came into this panel. I think giving up control, because for a GCC, sitting in a business, I've got to give up some control, and that's uncomfortable. To get through that, you've got to trust your partner, and that takes time, and it takes trust on both sides, and not pushing past the zone of comfort. And then the benefit you get is you get to focus on your business. It's that third bullet again, Mark, you let in with, to create value. I think initially the solution gives the business more opportunity to create value. And then ultimately, as we need more resources, the GCC can offer up additional resources and solutions to create more value. It really is the journey. So very, very well done on the kickoff there, Mark.
Well, thank you. It's interesting to hear, but before I comment on yours, Eric, I think I'm going to ask the same question of Sahal, because now he's coming at it as the manager of a captive. So as a reminder, the question, Sahal, is what were some of the areas that posed unanticipated challenges, but also some of the areas that work well when you initiated the captive model that you've got there at IG?
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening to Eric and also to Nimish, I think one of the key things that was talked about was building that trust, that transparency, having some kind of a governance model with enough cadence to look at the issues and spot them early on and work in partnership to resolve them. That is key. But of course, like you said, there are and there would always be those unanticipated challenges that would come up, and it is then up to you how quickly, how agile you are to react to those. One of the things that we faced was during the transition, that the on-site team were not probably incentivized enough to make that transition successful. And I think this is quite a key thing, and then often gets overlooked, right? So have you set the right kind of structure for the team who is transitioning the work? Have they been incentivized enough to make it successful? What is it that they would be doing past or beyond that transition, right? Has that been identified? Has that been communicated? And I think the other point that Nimish mentioned was around having that communication plan, right? So that everyone knows early on what is on the cards, what is on the agenda, what is the level of transition that we are talking about. So having that level of transparency with everyone who is going to be affected by that transition is very important. And for us, in the captive, the other important thing is the growth of the people who are in the captive as well, right? Who are working in on those processes. So what is it that we can offer to them beyond the initial transition activity, beyond the transactional activities, right? Because very soon people will start asking about what is next. So always the plan should be not just the transactional tasks, but then slowly get more value-added work for them. Building that capability of continuous improvement and automation is something that I have seen has been quite key, right? So as the processes come in and you standardize them, you start spotting those opportunities for automation, which also gives that growth to the people in the GCC to work on those initiatives and then move on to a more value-added work which they can do. And there are so many other things which are possible, things like data analytics, business intelligence, because the teams in GCC now have so much of business insight that they develop, right, working on those processes, that they can spot those commercial opportunities also. But the main thing is, are we providing the environment for them to look at the data and then analyze the data and then propose those innovative solutions, those improvements. So quite a few things that can be done, and it does take time. So providing opportunities for your people and understanding that there is a lot of insight which they have, which can be used for the business going forward as well.
You know, both of you, and Nimish, thanks for being patient. I'll come to you in just a minute, but both of you used the word value, and I thought that was very interesting because you're coming at it from different perspectives, right? Eric, I heard you come at it from the perspective, I mean, you've hired out a GCC essentially, and you're talking about the discomfort with losing control and taking baby steps and walking before you run as a way to build trust. Suhal, you're talking about the captive, where basically these are IG's people and IG's strategy. So from your perspective, what I'm hearing is you have to have the board on board. Senior management has got to be very committed to this. And that goes to our earlier comments maybe about these long-term strategies and being an alliance aligned with your business strategy as well. So it's very interesting to hear the different perspectives. And so with that said, Nimish, do you have something you want to add on, any additional insights that you can give to decision makers who might be contemplating some form of a GCC model?
I would say, Mark, that we've got Sohail here, who's running a captive, and we've got Eric, who's outsourced quite a few processes. So I would say that there is nothing like a wrong model for GCC. I mean, it depends on the different factors and appetite, etc. But if one had to really list down the three important factors to consider is what are your long-term objectives, the type of business or processes you are going to get outsourced or you're going to outsource, and what is the management bandwidth. I think these are very critical factors to consider. So, for example, it is very rare for someone to use a service provider for their internal engineering or specialized R&D function. It is a very tight relationship with business, and one is handling very sensitive data. Or I think, for example, for IG, in Sohail's case, I would say that they are working on their core functions, or at least a backend which is very critical to their core functions. So captive is a natural choice for them. But there are reasons to outsource to external service providers. Common processes, the transactional processes, they are very easily outsourced to a service provider. Or you may want to leverage the service provider's expertise to improve your processes, and that could be the reason for getting a service provider. and bringing about transformation to your processes. So in any case, the decision-making phase, as I told before, the decision-making phase is very critical. And appetite for management bandwidth is another factor which needs to be considered. Not all organizations want to create a outsourced function expertise within their own business and manage it. For them, it would be a distraction for their core business. So, and I've also seen that for some, what makes more sense is to set up an internal shared service organization, and then that works with other different service providers for different processes. So the permutation and combinations are endless here. In any case, I would say that once you decide to take a journey, identifying the right team within the organization is very important. If you are going to work with a service provider, one needs to do a proper due diligence and set your expectations very clearly. Develop the relationship, develop the trust, as Eric was mentioning. And again, I'm repeating myself, but one needs to manage this actively. It's not a passive role. Your intent should be to taste success on a year-to-year basis and not only during the initial phase. So I would say that's about what it is.
All right, thank you. I want to move from our discussion on modeling to our discussion on cyber here, if we can. So when data is stored and it's accessible by a variety of stakeholders over multiple platforms in many cases, what are some of the main challenges that a GCC would face when dealing with cyber resilience?
Yeah, I mean, in the current environment, of course, it makes it even more difficult, even more challenging with all our people, all the employees working from home, right? And as you mentioned, using multiple devices, multiple channels to access that. So yeah, it has become quite challenging. And for us, say for IG Group, we are in the financial trading industry. So it's a very heavily regulated industry, a lot of strict data protection laws in place. So for us, in that sense, we were a little fortunate because a lot of those protection, right, were already built in when COVID struck. So for us, moving into the work from home model was not a big challenge, and we were able to do it quite seamlessly. But of course, that was because a lot of work has been done over the years. So in that sense, I think that the challenge that the GCCs faced, I think, are not very different from the challenges that are faced by, say, the parent organization. So there is, of course, a need for an integrated solution which works across the board. So one of the things that we are looking at, or we've started doing, is having that zero trust security model, and I think in the current environment, it is even more important, even more required. So the zero trust model is based on a strict verification model, and then where you verify everything and you never trust, right? So that is something that we have started looking at, but of course that is also a journey, and you have to identify the most complex pieces where there's the biggest need and do that in a phased manner. Data protection, of course, again, another thing which is also part of the zero trust architecture. So you categorize your data, so all your data, your corporate data is categorized, and so you only give access to data to people who really need it, right? So you go for the lowest privilege possible to any person, and then gradually grow from there, and every interaction is always has to be authorized and authenticated. So quite a few things which we have done over a period as a corporate. So that is including the GCC, and yeah, I think that's still an evolving process, and then that's something that will continue over time.
I think many of the things you're talking about, all of us should be practicing in our own personal cyber security world as well. Let me remind the audience, because I see some questions are coming in, that you do have options to submit questions via the question box. Now would be a good time to do that if you want to, as we are, turning the corner and heading for home on this session. Nimish, Next Time does offer cybersecurity and data privacy expertise. So you are the right person for this question, not to push Next Time, but just to give context here. What would you say are the cyber risks that GCCs are currently exposed to? And maybe what could they do to ensure safety from those risks?
So Mark, I had touched upon technology in my first question, I believe. And frankly, today's cybersecurity has become more like a buzzword. And information security was always and has always been a priority for many service providers right from the beginning. Because essentially for any threat, the weakest link in the chain can be the Achilles heel, and no service provider wants to be that weak link. Unfortunately, what I have seen is that not many clients are focused on this, and I believe that they should be. They should be asking the right questions and ensuring, along with their IT teams and the security teams, to create the secure environment between the two organizations. And this has become very critical. I think most of the new clients that are coming into the picture now, they realize the importance of this, because the threat of cybersecurity has become much more in today's world. The other important thing to remember is that most of the threats that they occur today, they are actually insider threats. What I mean by these are not intentional threats, but these are because of the way people function, lack of awareness or lack of following of security protocols. And also sometimes business expediency is used as an excuse for overriding the security measures. So from that perspective, I believe, and that's what NextDime does with its own resources also, training of the staff and resources is very, very crucial. And it's not one-time training, it's a repetitive training that is very important. And from the client side, I think it's important that people start using, there are excellent tools available, how to monitor and to prevent these risks that are there. And lastly, I would say regular reviews by the security teams of the organizations is very critical to ensure a sort of a resilient data transfer between the organizations.
All right, thank you, Eric. I'm going to turn to you because, like me, you're not a technology geek. I mean, you're a CFO. I'm an operating guy. So, from the CFO perspective, when you're outsourcing, did you have any particular concerns about information security? How'd you address them? What were they?
Always is the short version of that answer. As far as do we have any concerns? But I agree with Nimish's last comment that imperative that you get an external assessment of your security risk internally. I mean, is every business, it's really incumbent on the officers to make sure that happens. We've done that for ourselves, and continue on the journey. It's a dynamic situation, as you know. Relative to outsourcing, certainly have concerns and need to ensure that things are done appropriately. So again, both of my experiences, multi-site is critical to think about as a foundation. So we've got activity flowing through multiple locations, domestically and internationally. So that creates more challenges to get the information flowing appropriately. Also, foundationally for me, we've outsourced. There isn't much in accounting that we haven't outsourced at least a part of, but to NextDime at this point. Not comprehensively, but quite a bit across the board. So NextDime has access to all of our general ledgers, not on the same system as a lot of businesses struggle with. We're working down that path, but multiple systems, AR/AP modules, certain bank access, and those types of things, access to customer payment portals, just variety of it's a laundry list of different types of accesses. And also piggyback on a comment that Nimish made, you the management team has to take this seriously and all be supportive. And relative to that question, the IT team, the internal IT team, this isn't just throw it over the wall and hope for the best. It requires focused effort and significant internal support. So we've got to have IT commitment on our side to partner with our outsourcing partner to make sure that this is all handled comprehensively.
Okay, in the final few minutes here, I've got some audience questions that are coming in. I'm going to curate these things, and it looks like a couple of them are very practical. So I'm going to save those for Suhal and Eric because you guys are on the practical side here. And there's one that's a little more focused on some of the things Nimish was already speaking to. So Nimish, let me start with you. The questions related to the models, the different GCC models we spoke about, captives, BOT, and managed services. And are there different cybersecurity things that ought to be addressed based on the different models?
Mark, I would say that, let's say for captives, it's more simplistic solution, since typically they will be on the same network as the parent organizations. And Sohail has touched upon this, and has all the information security policies and procedures will flow through. But when it comes to working with a third-party service provider, I think that is where the challenge lies, because then we have these two organizations and two networks that are there, and they need to talk to each other, or resources from one network are getting into the organization's network. So I think that is where the difference lies. So it's important for the client and the service provider to work pretty much close to each other, especially the IT teams and security teams, as Eric mentioned. And the client should be demanding a proper security audit out of their service providers with proof of various certifications which are available, these are third-party international certifications which are given, where the service provider is getting audited on a regular basis. Also, one should remember that if we are talking about public companies, depending on the processes that have been outsourced and the control that is being given to the service provider, there could be certain requirements of certifications purely from a compliance point of view also for the processes. So all these things need to be factored into when you're thinking about cybersecurity for various models.
All right, thank you. The next question, Sahal, is I'm sure it's best addressed to you because it's asking about captives. And you talked earlier about the decision points, the key decision points, but the question is, how long does it take to set up a captive?
There is no straight answer to this. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes before you start really hiring those people and doing your transition work. So there is a good 3-month phase where you are planning and you are looking at what is the talent availability. You are looking at, as Nimish mentioned earlier, about the set of documentation, whether you have the right set of documentation available. If not, then working on that. So that I think takes time. And then, of course, once you start, again, doing your market assessment, getting your recruitment team, starting off that, hiring, onboarding, then you start working on the transition where you might have some secondment, people coming in, someone else going to the location, looking at that. I think it's a good 12-month that you should be looking at to get to a state where you are starting work in the production mode, and then another 6 months looking at stabilization of that process, working out any kind of kinks that you have, getting the expectations set, getting your governance cadence going so that you are reviewing your service performance with the stakeholders. So that would take it 12 to 18 months for you to get that process bedded into the GCC.
Yeah, I think the captive model certainly has a longer ramp up time than would be a BOT or managed service. It could be a matter of weeks in those cases, if you align yourself with a provider. We're getting close here. Eric, I've got one final question to you that it seems like an appropriate way to end the session before we go to closing remarks. And the question was simple. It's, what's a successful GCC operation look like? And you've spoken about value creation and whatnot. So maybe, I don't know if you have an ROI or however you managed it and measured it, but what is a successful operation?
Also could spend an hour answering that question as well. But I think at its core, a successful GCC is truly just an extension of your team. And once you get to that point, you got to kind of go through all those layers and get to trust, obviously, and get comfortable handing over control, like we mentioned. But ultimately, they're just simply an extension of your team. And it's business is always a very dynamic environment. Nothing sits still, and nothing. What solved a problem last month, new problems this month are solved, and you got to think about that extension of your team dynamically and just partner with them and trust them. When you think opportunities turn up, socialize that with your GCC partner. I think the best piece of advice I got through all of this was my first go around, and we were on our side. We were trying to kind of make everything perfect before we threw it over the wall. So my friend Alpin, for those of you on the call that know her, she kind of sat me down and said, "Eric, you don't have to solve all these problems. You just give them to us. Let us, work through them, and we'll get back to you and work through it with you." So I think, that was the best piece of advice. And I think, going into this, you've got to get to that point of trust. You've got to turn over the control. Don't solve all the problems yourself. And the best result, like I said, other than being an extension of your team, is that what a good GC will do is not only facilitate the work, but they build the standard work, and they put it together in a way that can be trained. So whether that's your GCC partner that takes over that work, or you bring it back in-house, or it's a hybrid solution, standardizing and training around the work that you're doing, it's really the biggest benefit. So singularly, I would say that's what a successful partnership looks like.
Appreciate it. That sounded to me like a great closing remark, but we're going to invite all three of you to go ahead and append to that. To the audience members whose questions were not addressed, please rest assured we'll get back to you in writing after the session. But let me invite each of these three gentlemen to make some closing remarks here. Eric, if you want to start, and then Suhal, and we'll finish with Nimish.
Sure. Well, as everyone on the panel alluded to, there's no one solution. There's no one way to talk about this. It's all within the context of the problems you're trying to solve, within the context of the business you happen to be sitting in at the moment. For my travels, I've been in businesses as small as $20 million, and I've been in big businesses as big as $250 billion in my travels. And I think there's GCC solutions for all of those. You just have to scale the solutions to what your problems are. Like we talked about trust a lot, control a lot. You just have to make sure you're targeting the right problems in the right order, and work with your partner on that. They've done this before. That's the good news. I didn't need to be the expert on GCC when I first started. I just needed to know I had problems and socialize those problems with our partners. Target an area that was kind of low-hanging fruit, and begin and repeat. So I think the transition is the hardest part. The first step's the hardest part. I did it. It was significantly rewarding every which way. So hopefully this was helpful to folks that tuned in today. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone.
I'm sure it was. Suhal?
I was just thinking as Eric was talking, and one thing came to my mind is for the GCC to understand the business is also very, very important. A lot of times, again, that is something that gets overlooked, or not enough emphasis is given to that. So I think once that gets understood, and the GCC leadership along with the stakeholders start putting effort to build the domain expertise, business knowledge in the GCCs also, that's when your value add, your true innovation would start to come out of the GCC. So it's not just a transactional activity. Make sure that you are giving value-added work to the GCC. Make sure that you're passing on the domain knowledge, the domain expertise, also to the people in the GCCs, and then give them that freedom to innovate and then come out with solutions.
And Dr. Shah? Also muted again, my friend.
Sorry, I tend to not unmute myself, but it was interesting to hear both Eric and so I'll give the closing remarks. I think they're very, very powerful. Strategic vision, understanding the business, creating the trust relationship, transparency, going through the process yourself once and then expanding over it. I think one of the other things that I would like to add to this thing is that there is no right size. I mean, sometimes people ask, okay, what type of companies should set up a GCC or take advantage of outsourcing? There is no right answer. Anyone can, any company can outsource. It depends on identifying your problems first and talking to the service provider whether this problem will get solved or not. I think Eric did mention that also. So even a small company, a mid-market company, or a $1 billion+ companies also, I mean, everyone can take advantage of outsourcing. It just depends on what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And usually the service providers can help you make those decisions for based on their expertise.
And thank you. And thank you all, really. I mean, I think it was a very insightful panel. Each of you have different perspectives, and your versatility, I think, ultimately provided a lot of value to the listeners. So I hope that it helps them, and like Eric said, helps them on their GCC journey. We do look forward to having all of you join us for our remaining 2 webinars in this series. The next one is on November 17th, and it will include discussions on how to take advantage of multifunctional GCCs. And then we're going to broadcast our final installment on December 8th with a focus on technology and governance. So I'd be remiss before we depart. I want to thank everybody. A very heartfelt thank you to each of you listening today from across the world. And I mean that, you are global. To our very special guests, Eric, Suhal, and Nimish, again, for your insightful contributions. Our sponsors, USIBC and ICICI Canada, for their support. And then there's a complete team back at Next Time that works to make these events successful. And I want to give you my heartfelt thanks as well for doing your part to making this the success that it is. We have invited listeners, all of you, to connect with us and to discuss how Next Time can work hand in hand with you and your organization if you see fit. If you've got additional questions in line with today's discussion that we were unable to address due to our time constraints, please reach out to us at thinknext@nexttime.com, and our team or I will be very happy to respond offline. And across the globe, we do think next at Next Time, and we invite you to do the same. We welcome your feedback on today's presentation. Be vigilant, stay safe. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you.